Princess Lilibet Diana had been christened. Why would they use a title for their children that represents an institution they loathe so much?
For years, the royal family has quietly controlled how titles are handled behind closed doors. But nothing has prepared the world for what is now unfolding around Archie and Lilibet. What should have been a simple passport process has turned into a situation that is raising serious questions about the future of the monarchy itself. While official statements remain calm and carefully worded, insiders suggest something far more complicated is happening beneath the surface. Why would the palace resist something so basic? And what are they really trying to prevent? Join us as we uncover the full story. The passport battle that started a war. When Harry and Meghan settled into their life in Montecito, California in 2020, they were a young family starting over. They had walked away from one of the most powerful institutions in the world, and they left behind the ceremonies and the obligations that once shaped their daily lives. They were choosing something quieter, something more private, and something that allowed them to build a future on their own terms. At that stage, everything looked like a clean break. But even in those early moments, it became clear that leaving would not be as simple as they had hoped. There were still invisible ties connecting them to the system they had stepped away from, and those ties soon showed themselves in ways that felt unexpected and deeply personal. The moment that exposed this reality came through something that should have been completely ordinary. They applied for British passports for their children, Archie and Lilibet, expecting the same smooth process every family experiences. Forms were filled, documents were submitted, and then they waited. Weeks passed, and nothing came. More time passed, and still nothing arrived. What should have been routine quietly turned into something far more complicated. But here's where it gets more intriguing, so keep watching to find out what was really behind the delay. Sources close to the family revealed that the passport applications included two very specific details: the HRH title and the surname Sussex. On paper, this seemed like a natural choice. It reflected who the children were within the royal structure they were born into. But according to insiders, that was exactly where the problem began. A passport is not just a travel document, it is a legal statement of identity. And once it is issued, it becomes one of the most official records a person can have. So whatever is written on it carries lasting weight. And in this case, the inclusion of HRH raised quiet concerns in certain circles. There were people, reportedly in very senior positions, who were not comfortable with those titles appearing on official documents. They understood that once those details were recorded, they would define how the children were formally recognized moving forward. At the same time, the palace publicly denied any involvement in the delay. A spokesperson made it clear that neither the king nor palace officials had interfered. And so two very different stories existed side by side, and the space between them revealed more than either side intended to admit. However, to understand why this became such a sensitive issue, you have to look at how royal titles actually work. The system itself is built on rules that were established long before Harry and Meghan were even born. In 1917, King George V introduced a rule that shaped the monarchy for generations. He declared that the grandchildren of the reigning monarch would automatically be given the titles of Prince and Princess. So when King Charles came to the throne in September 2022,
I here present unto you King Charles, your undoubted king.
Archie and Lilibet became a prince and a princess overnight. It was not a decision that needed to be made. It simply happened. But the HRH designation operates differently. It has always been treated as something more specific. It is traditionally reserved for working royals, individuals who actively represent the crown and carry out official duties. And because Harry and Meghan had stepped away from those roles, their children found themselves in a very unusual position. They were entitled to their titles by birth, but there were questions about whether they should carry the full weight of royal status without being part of the institution in an active way. For Harry and Meghan, this was never about status or prestige. Those close to them explained that their decision came from a much more personal place. They wanted their children to have a choice, a real choice, the kind of choice that could only exist if every option remained open. They believed that Archie and Lilibet should be able to decide for themselves, when they were old enough to understand, whether they wanted to step into royal duties or live entirely private lives. Removing the HRH title at such an early stage felt like closing a door before the children even knew it existed. And that is what made the situation feel so deeply personal. It was not about holding on to anything. It was about not taking something away too soon. What finally broke the deadlock was not a quiet conversation or a private agreement. It was a legal move. Harry and Meghan's lawyers sent a formal letter, and the message behind it was unmistakable. If the delays continued, they would file a data subject access request. This is a legal tool under UK law that allows individuals to request every piece of information held about them, every email, every internal note, and every recorded decision. It is a process that brings everything into the open. And in this case, it was used as a way of saying that if the passports were not issued, then the truth behind the delay would be uncovered. Shortly after that letter was sent, the passports were finally delivered. And while that may have resolved the immediate issue, it did not erase the months of uncertainty that came before it. However, even the process of trying to resolve the issue had not been straightforward. During the long wait, the family attempted to use the UK's urgent 24-hour fast-track passport service. This service is designed to handle situations that require immediate attention. They secured an appointment. They prepared everything. And for a moment, it seemed like a solution was finally within reach. But at the last minute, the appointment was cancelled. The explanation given was a system failure. A simple phrase, but one that only added to the growing frustration. Because after months of waiting, another delay, especially one without clear detail, felt like too much. By that point, the situation had already taken an emotional toll. Harry, according to those close to him, was exhausted and deeply frustrated. He had spent months watching his children wait for documents that any other British child would receive without question. And that experience pushed him toward a conversation that changed everything. It was not about passports anymore. It was about identity. It was about what kind of future his children would have and what name they would carry into that future. Many sources revealed that Harry reached out to his uncle, Earl Spencer, to discuss the possibility of changing his children's surname from Sussex to Spencer, his mother's name, Diana's name. The reasoning behind it was both simple and deeply emotional. If the Sussex name and the HRH status were becoming a source of resistance, then perhaps the children would be better off stepping outside that system entirely. The Spencer name carried its own history, and it represented something more personal, something rooted in family, but separate from the structure that had created so much tension. The conversation between Harry and Earl Spencer was described as calm and understanding. His uncle listened carefully, and he recognized the emotions behind the idea. But in the end, he advised Harry not to go through with it. Sometimes a decision that feels right in the moment carries consequences that extend far beyond the present. And so the idea was set aside. The passports eventually arrived, and on the surface, the issue seemed resolved. But the fact that such a step was even considered tells a much deeper story. It shows just how far things had gone. This was no longer about paperwork or titles. It had become something far more personal. Something that touched on identity, family, and the future of two young children. And even though the documents were finally issued, the tension that built during that time did not simply disappear. But what unfolded next shook the entire British establishment to its core, the crisis that nobody saw coming. While the passport battle was quietly unfolding in California, something much larger was brewing inside the wider royal family. Although it had nothing to do with Harry and Meghan directly, It rippled through the House of Windsor in ways nobody expected. It began slowly, almost imperceptibly. But by February 2026, the quiet tension exploded. On the morning of February 19th, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor was arrested. It happened to be his 66th birthday. Thames Valley Police detained him on suspicion of misconduct in public office. And with that single moment, the British monarchy entered territory it had not seen for nearly 4 centuries. The last time a senior royal had faced such scrutiny, the country itself was a different place. Institutions were different. Public expectations were different. And the shock that reverberated through the royal establishment that morning was unlike anything the modern monarchy had experienced. The arrest was tied to documents that had already been causing damage behind the scenes for months. These were files connected to the Jeffrey Epstein case, released by U.S. authorities. And the content was serious. Emails surfaced that appeared to show Andrew sharing confidential government documents with Epstein. This was during the years he served as the UK's trade envoy. One email seemed to include an official brief about investment opportunities in Afghanistan. Another appeared to forward a report covering government visits to countries in Asia. These were not casual messages between acquaintances. These were state documents. Sensitive information he had access to only because of trust placed in him by the British government. Police arrived at his home on the Sandringham estate early that morning. He was held for questioning for nearly 12 hours. Then he was released under investigation, not charged, not cleared, but somewhere in between. King Charles, who had not been informed about the arrest in advance, released a brief statement. It simply stated the law must take its course. The political reaction was swift and uncompromising. Members of Parliament from multiple parties began speaking publicly. Within days, calls to remove Andrew from the line of succession were everywhere. At that time, he was 8th in line to the throne, directly behind Harry, Archie, and Lilibet. A government minister told a national broadcaster that steps were being taken to ensure Andrew could never come close to becoming king. The leader of one of the main opposition parties called his continued presence in the succession intolerable, and the push was not limited to the UK. Australia and New Zealand both signaled that they would support legislation removing him. The response across the political world was unusually coordinated. It moved quickly. There was no time for delay, and that pressure sent a message that no one in the royal establishment had expected. But here is the part that most people missed. The bigger story was not one man's fall from grace. It was the conversation his arrest forced into the open. For generations, royal status had been guaranteed by birth. Your blood was your protection. Your birthright meant security. That had always been the unspoken rule. But Parliament was quietly exploring something very different. A model where royal status was not automatic, where it had to be earned, through service, through loyalty, and through participation in the institution. Not just inherited and kept, no matter what. And this was a fundamental change in thinking that had long-term implications for the monarchy. That change mattered enormously when you considered Archie and Lilibet. These were 2 children growing up in California. They had no active royal duties. They were not working royals, and under a system that rewards service over birth, maintaining their titles and protections would become complicated. The Andrew situation did not create this issue for them, but it accelerated a conversation that was already moving in that direction. And the speed of that acceleration caught many in the royal establishment off guard. In March 2026, Parliament made its position even clearer. A new law was passed, removing the final links between hereditary titles and participation in government. For centuries, being born into a noble family had meant automatic power, automatic access to decision-making, a guaranteed seat at the table. That tradition was gone. The message from Parliament was sharp and unmistakable. Privilege based solely on birth was no longer enough. Influence had to be earned, through purpose, through action, and through engagement. And that message landed at exactly the moment it could have the most impact on the Sussex family. The arrest and political fallout were not just about Andrew. They were about precedent, about expectations, about the future of the monarchy itself. It forced every senior royal to confront questions that had previously existed only in whispers. How much of royal life is inherited? How much is earned? And in a world of constant scrutiny, how do you balance tradition with accountability? These were questions no one in the royal family could ignore. For Harry and Meghan, the timing could not have been more significant. They had already stepped away from active duty. They were raising their children outside the UK. And now, the institution was openly signaling that birth alone no longer guaranteed protection. Titles could be questioned, rights could be reassessed. And for two young children, that reality was striking. This showed that the monarchy was evolving, that the rules were changing, and that the world they were living in was not the same one their ancestors had known. But here is where this story takes a turn that nobody in the royal establishment was prepared for. The empire Meghan is building, while the palace burns. While lawyers were sending legal letters, politicians were debating succession laws, and the palace was managing one crisis after another, Meghan Markle was doing something entirely different. She was building. Not reacting, not defending, but building. And what she was building was something no duchess in the history of the British monarchy had ever attempted before. She was building a business empire, not a small side project, not a single brand collaboration, but a structured, carefully planned commercial operation designed to grow over time. And she was doing it quietly, with patience, with control, and with a level of focus that suggested this had been in motion long before the public ever saw it. The brand is called As Ever, and its story reveals something much deeper than products or branding. It reveals a change in identity, a transition from royal figure to independent operator. And more importantly, it shows how Meghan has chosen to redefine what power looks like outside the walls of the monarchy. As Ever did not begin with that name. It started as American Riviera Orchard when Meghan introduced it in early 2025. The name carried a strong sense of place. It was tied to California, to a specific image and a specific lifestyle. But that connection also created a limitation. It anchored the brand to one location. And that is something Meghan quickly moved away from. The rebrand to As Ever was not cosmetic, it was strategic. The new name removed geography from the identity and made the brand flexible and portable. It allowed it to exist anywhere in the world without feeling out of place. And that decision tells you something important. This was never meant to stay small. It was always meant to grow. The early products reflected that vision. Fruit spreads, flower sprinkles, Napa Valley champagne, carefully curated gift sets. Everything positioned at the premium end of the market, with nothing casual and nothing rushed. Each item felt intentional, as if it was designed to sit comfortably in high-end spaces. The kind of products you would find in a boutique, not a supermarket. The kind you would give as a gift when presentation matters. And this positioning was not accidental. Meghan was entering a very specific space, a space where personal taste becomes a brand, where lifestyle becomes a business. And from the beginning, it was clear she understood exactly how that space works. However, Netflix played a key role in bringing As Ever into public view. Meghan's cooking and lifestyle show gave the brand something most new businesses struggle to get. That's immediate global exposure, millions of viewers, and a built-in audience. It was the perfect launch platform. The brand was introduced through storytelling, through visuals, and through moments that felt personal and curated. And for a while, the partnership worked. It gave As Ever visibility. It gave it credibility. But in March 2026, that partnership came to an end. Netflix stepped back.
You hear that? That is the sound of hearts breaking all around the world.
She's becoming a royal rock star.
The statement was polite, and supportive. It described the collaboration as successful and expressed interest in watching the brand grow independently. But the real significance was not in the wording. It was in what happened next. Because once Netflix stepped away, Meghan was no longer sharing control. The brand became fully hers. Every decision, every direction, every expansion. And those close to her described the split as planned. Not suddenly, and not reactive, but a natural next step. The brand had reached a point where it no longer needed a platform to stand on. It could stand on its own. And what followed made one thing very clear. This had always been the plan. Ahead of a planned visit to Australia in April 2026, something unexpected came to light. Meghan had already taken steps to expand as ever internationally, quietly, carefully, and without public attention. 12 trademark applications had been filed in Australia, not recently, not in response to success, but back in September 2024, which was long before the brand even launched publicly. And those filings had already been approved. The scope of those trademarks was striking: skincare, candles, gardening tools, jewelry, homeware, clothing, yoga equipment, pet products, food spreads, beverages, online media, hospitality services. It was not a single business. It was an ecosystem, a full lifestyle structure. When asked about these filings, a spokesperson responded cautiously. They said no final decisions had been made about international expansion. But that answer did not match the scale of what had already been done. Because filing trademarks across 12 categories in a foreign country is not a casual move. It requires planning, foresight, and a clear understanding of where a brand is going before it even begins. In this case, it showed that "as ever" was never just an idea. It was a long-term strategy, one that had been developing quietly, long before anyone outside Meghan's inner circle realized what was happening. Now, this is where the tension around the Sussex brand begins to come back into focus. Because while Meghan has stepped into the business world, she has not stepped out of her identity completely. When Harry and Meghan agreed to step back from royal duties in 2020, they accepted one key condition. They would not use their HRH titles for commercial purposes. That boundary was clear. But Meghan still holds the title Duchess of Sussex, and that title carries weight. It carries recognition. It carries history. No matter how carefully the brand is presented, that connection remains in the background. It is not always stated. It does not need to be. It just exists quietly in perception and in association. Every product released, every campaign launched, and every event attended, all of it exists alongside that identity. And that creates a tension that has never fully gone away. Because while the business is independent, the history behind it is not. Critics have pointed this out for years. Royal commentators have returned to the same question again and again. Where does personal brand end, and where does royal association begin? And in 2026, the palace responded in its own way, not with direct criticism, not with public statements, but with structure. King Charles granted Prince William and Catherine the authority to issue royal warrants. That decision may have seemed administrative on the surface, but it carried clear meaning. It placed control of official royal endorsement firmly in their hands. It defined who would represent the monarchy in a commercial sense. And just as importantly, it defined who would not. When you step back and look at the full picture, something unusual starts to take shape. While the palace is managing pressure from within legal battles, political scrutiny, and questions about its future, Meghan is building something outside of it, quietly, carefully, and without asking for permission. That contrast is what makes this moment so significant, because for the first time, influence is no longer tied to a single institution. It is being split between two very different worlds, one built on tradition, hierarchy, and control, the other built on independence, identity, and global reach. And somewhere between those two worlds are two children, growing up far from the center of it all, yet still deeply connected to everything that is unfolding. Because while the palace debates the future, and Meghan builds hers, Archie and Lilibet are living a reality that neither side can fully control. And that is where this story becomes something far more personal than politics or power. Because at the center of everything, there are two children trying to understand a world they were born into, but do not truly know. So stay tuned as we delve into this. Growing up between two worlds. When Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor was born in May 2019, the world watched and celebrated. When his sister Lilibet Diana Mountbatten Windsor arrived in June 2021, the family sent photographs from California, and the world smiled again. They were born into one of the most recognized families on the planet. They carry titles that connect them to 1,000 years of British history. And yet if you asked either of them today what Britain felt like, what Buckingham Palace looked like from the inside, or what it was like to spend an afternoon with their grandfather the king, they would have very little to tell you. Because the life they were born into and the life they are actually living are two very different things. Archie and Lilibet are 6th and 7th in line to the British throne. They are grandchildren of the reigning king of the United Kingdom. And they have not set foot on British soil since June 2022, when they were brought over as toddlers for the late Queen Elizabeth's Platinum Jubilee celebrations. At that point, Archie was 3 years old, and Lilibet had just turned 1. They have not seen King Charles in person since that visit. They have not stood inside a British palace. They have not attended a royal ceremony or walked the grounds of an estate they are technically connected to by birth. They are growing up in a sunny neighborhood in California, and while their parents have worked hard to give them a warm and stable home, the distance between their daily life and the institution they were born into grows wider with every passing year. You can see that distance reflected in something as simple as the royal family's official website. Archie and Lilibet were added to the line of succession on the site in March 2023. But their profiles tell a very thin story compared to the profiles of Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis. William and Catherine's children have detailed, regularly updated entries that reflect their central place in the future of the monarchy. Archie and Lilibet's pages are minimal and basic, the kind of entry that acknowledges someone exists without saying very much about them. In the world of royal protocol, differences like this are never accidental. The official website is one of the ways the institution quietly signals to the world who is being invested in and who is being kept at arm's length. And the signal around these two children is not a warm one. Even the most personal and sacred milestones of their early lives have unfolded outside the traditional royal framework. Princess Lilibet was baptized not by the Church of England, but by a bishop from the Episcopal Church in Los Angeles. That might sound like a small administrative detail to most people, but within the world of the British monarchy, it carries real significance. Every senior royal child for generations has been welcomed into the faith through the Church of England, usually at Buckingham Palace or Windsor Castle, and it's always surrounded by family, godparents, and a ceremony steeped in centuries of tradition. However, Lilibet's baptism happened in California, in an American church, with American traditions. And for a little girl who is 7th in line to the throne of a country she barely knows, that single detail quietly captures everything about the world her parents have built for her. The single most practical barrier standing between Archie and Lilibet and any kind of normal relationship with their British family is the security situation. When Harry and Meghan stepped back from their royal duties, their automatic right to taxpayer-funded police protection during UK visits was taken away by the Home Office. Harry challenged that decision in court. He argued that his family was globally recognizable, that they faced real and documented threats, and that the level of protection being offered was not enough to keep them safe when they visited the UK. But the courts disagreed. In May 2025, the High Court ruled the decision was lawful. But that was not the end of the story. In December 2025, a new security review was quietly set in motion. It came to light that no formal threat assessment had been carried out for the Sussex family since 2019. 6 years had passed without anyone officially sitting down to review the risks they faced. Harry's legal team argued this was not a deliberate policy decision. It was a failure of the process itself. However, something happened during a UK visit Harry made in September 2025 that made the argument very hard to ignore. A known stalker came dangerously close to him on 2 separate occasions during that trip. Sources close to Harry said that proper security arrangements for future UK visits were now expected to follow. No official announcement had been made at the time, but the direction was clear to everyone paying attention. Because underneath all of the legal battles and constitutional debates and brand strategies, there is a sincere story that no court ruling can fully capture. King Charles has been receiving treatment for cancer since early 2024. He is not a young man, and his grandchildren in California have not been in the same room as him in nearly 4 years. Those close to Harry say he has spoken more than once about wanting his father, King Charles, to have a real relationship with Archie and Lilibet while there is still time. That is not a political statement. It is not about titles or trademarks or succession rights. It is a son who wants his children to know their grandfather. It is a grandfather who, by all accounts, loves those children and wants to be part of their lives. And right now, the distance between what everyone quietly wants and what is actually happening remains vast. And then the British monarchy has been through things that should have broken it. Wars, abdications, affairs. Scandals have played out on the front pages of every newspaper in the world, but it has survived all of them. It has never faced quite this situation before. 2 children who are legally part of the institution, who carry royal titles, who are 6th and 7th in line to the throne, but who are growing up on the other side of the planet, unfamiliar with the country whose crown they are in line to inherit, and caught in the middle of a dispute that the adults on both sides are still struggling to resolve. Whatever this story becomes in the years ahead, it will be shaped in part by decisions being made right now about 2 children who had no say in any of it. They did not choose the palace. They did not choose California. They did not choose the title dispute, or the security standoff, or the constitutional debates being held in their names. They are just children, growing up between 2 worlds, and still waiting to find out where they truly belong. So, do you think the royal family is doing right by trying to make decisions for Archie and Lilibet? Or are these children being used as pawns in a much bigger game? Let us know in the comments section below. If you enjoyed watching this video, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more. Also, click the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.